This is a fossil fish from North Dakota. Those beads in its gills are impact glass. It was breathing when they landed.
The place is called Tanis. It's a bend in a fossil river in southwestern North Dakota, in the Hell Creek Formation. 66 million years ago, a meandering river cut through here and ran east toward an inland sea whose shoreline was only a few kilometers away. The inside of the bend was a sloping sandbar, dry long enough that animals had dug burrows into it.
Quiet spot. Good place to be a fish.
Then something dumped more than a meter of sediment on top of it in a couple of hours. And on top of that sits a band of clay, 1 to 2 centimeters thick.
Hang on to that band of clay. It's the reason this thing is a stopwatch, and not just a pile of dead fish. Now the obvious answer here is a flood. Rivers flood, fish die. Sad, but not exactly a mystery.
Except the water came from the wrong direction. The carcasses and the tree trunks in that layer line up the same way. Heads and stems pointed into the current, and that current was running west. Inland backwards, up the river.
Lying next to the fish. Ammonites. Shelled sea animals. The pearly shine still on them. Sitting in the same rock as freshwater sturgeon. Ammonites aren't dinosaurs, by the way. We've already done an episode about a label like that.
Ammonites don't swim up rivers. Something carried them in. One researcher has argued those shells could have been ripped out of much older rock, not swept in from a sea nearby, so that piece isn't settled. There's more sea in that layer than shells, though. Microscopic marine plankton, too. All of it from the very end of the Cretaceous.
So, not a flood. Something pushed the ocean uphill. Okay. But how do we know it was that asteroid? And not just some asteroid.
Start with the beads. Hit a planet hard enough, and you throw superheated rock into the sky. Some of it comes back down as droplets of glass. The beads at Tanis are chemically almost indistinguishable from Chicxulub impact glass. They're bone-dry inside, 2 to 0.03% water, which is what impact glass looks like.
Date them, and you get 65.76 million years. Give or take 150,000. That's the measured number behind the round 66, and it matches Chicxulub everywhere else we've dated it.
A few beads are still perfect, because they landed in tree resin and got sealed inside amber. And that band of clay on top is the impact layer itself. Iridium at nearly 4 parts per billion, and minerals with shock damage in them.
So this isn't a fish kill from somewhere near the end of the Cretaceous. This is the end of the Cretaceous, with the impact layer on top. I'm reaching for the stamp that says, case closed. Give me a second. Okay, this is the good part.
More than half of the sturgeon and paddlefish in that layer have impact beads packed into their gill rakers, the comb-like structures a filter feeder strains its food with. Somebody put one of those paddlefish through a scanner.
The beads show up in the gill rakers, and nowhere else in the animal.
Not in the mouth, not down the throat, not scattered over the bones. Which tells you 2 things. The fish strained them out of the water, and it never got as far as swallowing them. Paddlefish feed by cruising along with their mouths open, sieving plankton out of the water.
So it's out doing its job, and the sky starts raining glass beads into its gills.
In the words of the paper, these fish were alive and foraging during the impact in the last minutes of the Cretaceous.
Not the last day, the last minutes. So let's start the clock at the moment of impact. Tanis sits about 3,050 kilometers from ground zero.
At that distance, the first seismic waves arrive 6 minutes after the hit, the next set at 10, the big slow ones at 13. The quake itself was somewhere around magnitude 10 to 11.
Nothing at Tanis felt the impact itself. 6 minutes later, everything felt the planet ring.
The glass reaches the top of the atmosphere over Tanis between 13 and 25 minutes after impact, depending on the angle it was thrown at. First beads land around 15 minutes in. Nearly all of it has finished falling within 1 to 2 hours, and the whole sediment layer goes down inside that same window.
Fish and logs in there are standing at an angle, running through the full thickness of the bed. You don't get that from slow burial. Between the lower and upper parts of the layer, there are little funnels, 3 to 8 centimeters deep, usually with one fat glass bead at the bottom.
Craters, tiny ones. Single beads landing in wet mud, buried by the next surge before anything could smooth them over. Which rules out the suspect everybody reaches for first, a tsunami rolling in from the crater. A wave traveling from Chicxulub needs at least 18 hours to reach North Dakota.
18 hours. The Rock says 1 to 2. Our suspect has an alibi, and it's airtight. Here's where the popular version of this story goes wrong. You'll usually hear that the glass clogged the fish's gills and suffocated them. No peer-reviewed paper on Tanis says that. What the papers say is that these animals were buried alive, and that the mass death was most likely caused by extremely rapid burial in fine sediment. So the glass isn't the murder weapon, it's the timestamp.
It proves the fish were still breathing when the sky arrived.
That's all it proves. I'd love to stamp this one closed. I'm putting the stamp back down. Because there's one question nobody has finished answering. What kind of wave was it? The team that described Tanis in 2019 proposed a seismic. That's the slosh you get in a body of water when the ground underneath it shakes. Same thing your bathtub does when somebody slams a door.
In 2024, another group ran the wave physics. Their conclusion, calling it psyching, may be misleading. Water shaken directly by an earthquake, they argue, moves in waves that last a few minutes at most. The crest pushes inland. The trough drags it back out. Net travel, a few hundred meters. That's nowhere near enough to carry seawater and seashells kilometers up a river.
So they put 3 other options on the table: the crater floor rebounding and shaking the water for many minutes instead of a few, an underwater landslide near Tanis, or a local fault snapping and lifting the seafloor. Their own summary, better constrained, still not resolved. And one of the scientists who first described Tanis is a co-author on that new paper. That's not science falling apart. That's science checking its own homework. One thing we can pin down is the season. 6 fish from Tanis, 3 paddlefish jaws, 3 sturgeon fin spines.
Fish bone grows in seasonal bands, like tree rings. Growth stalls in the cold and picks up when the water warms. All 6 stopped growing just after a winter line, partway through building a new band.
6 for 6. That's not a coincidence. That's a season.
Carbon in one of those paddlefish jaws says that year's feeding hadn't peaked yet, and oxygen across the last 6 years of that same jaw says the fish lived in fresh water the whole time. So those bands really are seasons. Northern Hemisphere, spring. Southern Hemisphere, fall.
The last spring of the Mesozoic.
Now the part that usually gets left out. Tanis is famous for things that haven't been published. A mummified dinosaur leg with skin on it. A pterosaur embryo. Feathers that turned up in a magazine in 2019 but never made the scientific paper that month.
None of that has been through peer review. That doesn't make it wrong. It just means it hasn't been checked yet.
A paleontologist at the Natural History Museum in London points out something else. A surge like this could have dug up an animal that died earlier and mixed it into the same mud.
One more thing. Tanis is a single river bend. It can't tell you how dinosaurs were doing across the planet. And in Hell Creek, the number of dinosaur species was already dropping before the impact. The last dinosaur that wasn't a bird probably died somewhere else, later. So the case closed, stamp goes back in the drawer. 2 others stay out on the desk, still arguing and unsolved.
We have a fossil that recorded an hour. We still can't tell you what the water was doing.
So which one's your money on? Crater rebound, underwater landslide, or a local fault? Tell me in the comments. Next time, we go looking for the very last one. Subscribe and keep your facts straight with Stick and Bone.